encouragement and participation in these. There are 2 handouts that I have. Does everybody have 2 things? One says memorial service planning in bold, and the other one says sample memorial service order. Brian's got some more. So this is going to be very workshop-y. Like, I'm not going to just present and talk for a long time. There's any time you have a question, please feel free. We have another mic somewhere. Yes? Brian's got it? Awesome. And Joe, if you could let me know if there are questions that come up, just give me a wave as we're going through. We can always go back. So this is very conversational. So I'll just tell you to start with, we have 2 different sheets here. One is memorial service planning. That one has a back side. And the sample memorial service order is just the single sheet. So we're going to start with the memorial service planning. So part of why we want to do this is because when you're actually in the moment of having to plan a memorial service, it can be difficult to think straight. You're in a fog, things are hard, you're exhausted, you're thinking about a million other things. This can be very, very, very difficult. So trying to do some thinking about it now, whether it's for yourself, in order to have conversations with loved ones, is we want to try to ease that time when that is so difficult. And to normalize, too. We are so accustomed to using euphemisms. A person passed away, they went to be with Jesus, they're in heaven. We use a lot of phrases because it's difficult to talk about death. It's difficult to say that this is a part of this rhythm of life that we will all experience. And so maybe you haven't noticed, maybe you have. Whenever I have to send out an email, I always say that a person died, always, because it's important to really accept and confront and embrace this particular season of life. So I just want to say that if you've noticed that, it's on purpose, and listen yourself for how people talk about death, about dying, and it's ways that coping mechanisms almost that we use because it's so hard. So we find other ways to soften the edges of something that is really, really difficult. And so that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to help get us to a place where we can have more frank, honest, open conversations with our loved ones. We were standing over in the fellowship hall a few minutes ago, and another person and I were talking about memorial services and how, when I was considering accepting this role, I thought about memorial services and like, oh man, is this something that I could do? That sounds like it would be really hard. But actually, it's one of the greatest gifts of this role. It sounds weird to say that I love memorial services, but I do, because it is a time when we can be really honest with each other, really vulnerable, to acknowledge the greater things in life that sometimes we just get too busy, but to really sit with, what are we doing here? Why are we here? Some of the questions that I know Gary likes to talk about, the big questions in life. But in the end, I thought, this is something that I want to be able to be with people in these seasons of life, that it's one of those times when these rituals, these corporate gatherings, community gatherings matter for our life together. Anytime someone says, I don't want a memorial service, I'm like, it's not about you. It doesn't matter if you don't want one. The rest of us need to do this. This is really important. So it's something that I love to do. It's something I take seriously, and it's something that I think is important for our life together. So the memorial service planning checklist that says schedule of services checklist. On the front, this is the memorial service. On the bottom, there's an optional section for graveside. And then the backside is very similar to the sample memorial service order. This service planning is something that I inherited and have since highly adapted. I've been here for almost 9 years this summer. I don't know if you can believe that or not. I can hardly believe it. A lot has changed in 9 years. There's this Zoom thing. Hi, Zoomers. We're happy you're here, too. And so how we do so many things has changed. So this is something that I've inherited and now have highly adapted. And so the reason why that backside looks different is because the other paper, the sample memorial service order, is something that's much closer to what we actually do now, if that makes sense. And again, this is all optional. These are things to consider. These might not be pieces that are important to you or important to your loved ones, but it's one of the things that we don't want to forget about. So let's just start at the top. Memorial service. This is a place where we would put a date. As we come and sit together, when we're actually planning a service, if I'm sitting with the family, we'll put a date down. You might not know the date that you're going to have a memorial service right now, so this is not something that you need to worry about at the moment, but that's why that's there, is when we're actually planning a service, we put the date there. The next line is for an accompanist. Again, this is something that you might have someone that is important to you, important to your family. You might have a request that there be a particular accompanist, and so that might be something that you would write down. If you have a relationship with someone and you would like for that person to play, write that down. And there can be then different options for congregational singing, or if there is a choir and an accompanist that works with a particular group in that way, or if there's a soloist singing and they have their own accompanist. So different pieces for different situations. Sometimes there is special music, and with that special music, it could be a soloist or an ensemble or a whole choir. And so these are just, again, a couple of different elements to think about. These days, AV is always a yes. Yes, we need AV. That particularly means a microphone. And you all know how awful it is if you cannot hear in this sanctuary. So we always have someone at least to run sound. PowerPoint is another part of that AV if you're showing pictures, slideshows, that kind of thing. Very often for a memorial service, it's just like one of our regular services where we have a printed order of service, and then we have, not exactly mirrored, but another version of that up on the screens that is helpful for people, especially on Zoom, who might not have something printed in front of them. One of the things that we had a lot of conversations about when I first started here was about how do we use these screens. The sanctuary, when I came, was only 3 years old, maybe not even that. And so we were trying to think a lot about how do we use these screens. And we talked about that not just mirroring the printed order of service, but that the screens are meant to sort of be more evocative. So we use art in the screens. We try to use it in a way that goes beyond just the nuts and bolts of the printed order of service. So in a memorial service, then we usually get something like picture slideshows or something like that. But there's a lot of openness. Sometimes we have videos and things like that. But then the additional layer now is Zoom. And so if Zoom is something that is important to you for a service, then we also have somebody to come and run the Zoom system. That also means the option to record the service. When I first got here, the camera that was up in the back required a VHS tape. And somebody, Steve Regier, bless his heart, usually had to climb up a ladder and put in a tape, and it was only set up so that it could record 60 minutes. If you went over, you had to switch out that tape. So we didn't used to do recordings very much, and now it's very easy because we have a camera that is set up to feed into into Zoom and all of that. And so Zoom also comes with, even though it doesn't say here, Zoom also comes with the option of having a recording. When we do have a Zoom option and there's a recording, that's not something that we will put, available for public view on our YouTube channel. But if a recording exists, it is on our YouTube channel. It's just hidden from public view. So there are the services that are, if somebody wants it to be sent to someone, we can always go back and get a link. That's how, just so you know, that's how that works. So option for Zoom, especially with people who live at a distance who might not be able to travel, and with Zoom, an option to record. Another thing to consider, and this is where some of the words start to get tricky a little bit. So here under Zoom, we have tribute/eulogy. And then on the other one, the sample memorial service order, we separate out eulogy and remembrances. So it used to be that a tribute or a eulogy was done by one person. Maybe we might even call this a life story. Sometimes it's printed and included in the order of service if that's something that the family wants, and sometimes it's not. It just depends on what the family wants in that regard. But these days we treat them separately in terms of somebody sharing a written life story, a written eulogy, and then remembrances in the order of 3 to 5 minutes that are shared by other people. Sometimes those are grandchildren. Sometimes, one time it was a series of different coworkers throughout somebody's life that gave sort of a different idea of the trajectory of this person's career. So those remembrances are usually 3-ish people that might offer a remembrance. But it's optional. You don't have to have something like that. But it's helpful to think in terms of the eulogy that is different than the remembrances. Those remembrances are the personal stories, and sometimes people are apologetic and say, well, what I have to share is funny. I'm like, good, that's fine. We can inject a humorous element into this. It's okay to laugh at a memorial service and to remember someone's life in that way. So don't be afraid to include those stories too. A guest book is often something that is forgotten by immediate family because it is just not high on the priority list of things to happen. But it's nice to have out in the lobby, in the narthex, because on that day, it can be difficult to remember who was there, can be difficult to remember conversations. So having that guest book to look back on, to remember who was there, can be helpful. And having it on a checklist is even better because then you don't have to remember it. So then the order of service, again, that's my sample memorial service, or the shorter version that's on the back. And that's where we talk about all of the different elements in the service. The eulogy, scripture readings, songs, all of those kinds of things. So putting together the order of service. That could be a whole different conversation than this one. So it can sometimes be that we need more than one conversation to plan a service. Things like the printed program, we will usually do that in the office just as a matter of course. There's only been a couple of odd times when I have officiated a service and everything's been printed up somewhere else and been brought there. When I did one that was at a funeral home, they printed up all of those things, and it was, I just arrived and everything was done. But when we're doing a service here, we will just take care of that. That's not something extra that anybody has to think about. Once we have the order of service, we put it together. We will send a draft copy for approval to make sure that we have everything right before we print it. we need to go back, I think, to getting everybody having a nice picture, because there have been a few times when we have needed a nice picture to put on the cover of a memorial service bulletin, and we haven't had a great one. So we just need to have a nice church portrait day to make sure we all have some nice pictures to work with. Marjorie's had the best picture that they were able to find, and I'm glad that they did. Where are we at? Printed program. Ushers. This is one of those things that you don't have to think about unless you want particular people involved. Ushers are the people who help people to get to seats if there are walkers that need to be moved to the side, if we need to remove a chair to make room for a wheelchair, if we're having to scramble to add more chairs, if we're asking someone, hey, can you move down a little bit to make a little bit more room? You know, those are the ushers. They will also come and help to dismiss people at the end of the service. If you don't have people that you want to be an usher, I will just take care of that. It's not something that you need to worry about. We don't have printed here, but that includes greeters as well. Greeters are people who are at the beginning of the service handing out the order of service to people. So greeters and ushers, we just take care of that. It will magically happen unless you have specific wishes that you would like to happen there. I'm going to stop for just a second so I can take a drink of water. Any questions so far? Joe's got something back there.
The questions they brought up on Zoom is saying AV sound. AV would equal audio visual, and so forth.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
What does AV stand for?
Yes, AV stands for audio visual, and that's Joel doing running the sound with the microphone. And if there's also a PowerPoint, there doesn't have to be. If there's also a PowerPoint, that person is doing that too. The Zoom part is separate but related. They work together. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, feel free to clarify. Other questions so far? Okay. So we are at refreshments afterwards. And so this varies just depending on usually time of day. If the service is scheduled for the late morning, then a lunch reception would be something that would follow, if that's something that the family wants. If a service is in the afternoon, usually it's something more like coffees and cookie or pie or whatever, that kind of thing. If you're not wanting to have something like a full meal, it's easier to just schedule a particular time. That way people sort of know what to expect and plan for. Sometimes this is important to families, and sometimes it's just an extra thing. So it would just be something that I would work with you to decide, is a meal afterwards something that is important, or would you rather have something else? And so we set the time according to what it is that you want for refreshments. I've been to services that there will be a graveside for a small group of people, a larger meal, and then a big service in the church after that, and then light refreshments to follow. So there's a lot of different types of configurations depending on what it is that is important to you. Wait. If we don't talk in the mic, people on Zoom can't hear.
Does the family provide the food, or does the church do that?
These days, the family has. I know that was different once upon a time. Gary, you were part of that, yes? He's not answering. It depends. That's true. It has depended.
There were occasions where, I think if there were occasions where the family looked, not so much if they had the means, but if they didn't have the, let's say, the number of people themselves that would be there, then in some ways the church could, it depends.
Yes, that's true. Most of the time these days, the family will provide for the meal. But as Gary says, there are times when the church can absolutely step in and help, depending on the situation. Rocky and then Arlene.
Okay. So, Audrey, does the church have a set price, like, you know, for the whole kit and caboodle? I'm sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful.
For
It was a
people
great
who
question.
are members, regular attenders of the church, there's no charge. I don't have a fee. When we have done services for people who aren't necessarily a part of the church, it would come under more of a facilities use agreement that Courtney would administer as part of her job as facilities manager. However, very often people want to give honorariums. I would never feel like from a member of our church that was expected. But for people who are the accompanists or doing AV or some other things, offering an honorarium to them, I think, would be appropriate. I don't know that anybody necessarily expects it, but it's certainly a gracious gesture for them. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Well, and speaking from someone who's played a number of services, when I'm given an honorarium, it has been anywhere from $50 to $100, and someone once gave me $500, which bought my new washing machine. But as far as meals or snacks or whatever, from the fellowship committee's standpoint, we're happy to do any of the setup and cleanup and service, you know, whether, you know, if you're bringing in food, you know, we can most graciously do that.
Yes, thank you. That's the second part to the bringing the food, is how does the food get out and served and cleaned up and all of that. Usually it's a conversation with the fellowship chair, and very often inviting additional people to help with the setup and cleanup for things like that. Was there another resume question?
The question was effectively, what do families pay for in terms of people or activities? And I think you covered
Okay.
that with honorariums and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, so I have received honorariums between $100 and $200, and sometimes not. And it's always something that is not expected by me because this is part of my role here. So does that answer those questions? So that goes through some of the setup and cleanup.
Like, I'm a regular attender, but my kids aren't, so I'm not planning on them passing, but is that like an outside thing where we would do an agreement?
If it was for a
Like
child of a
yeah.
member, we would just work with you as you're the grieving family. It wouldn't be something as an extra thing. It would be like, we don't have a relationship. And in those situations, I had a really, really tricky one with someone that had a very, very loose connection to the church, was not a regular attender. It was during COVID, but they really wanted the church to somehow be involved in this service. And it was during those days of COVID when I was not going to be in a building with any other person that I didn't know. We ended up doing this video of, like, she came in and set up an urn and some pictures, and we did a video of that. And then we did a video of some of the candles. We did video and put it all together of different parts of the church. And then I had a little homily reflection that I did. So she had that and then could send it to friends. But it was the oddest thing I've ever done regarding memorial services. Other questions before we keep going here? So I think we're through food preparation, organized menu, those kinds of things. Graveside services are more rare these days, but not something that is never done. They're just less common. Usually they are shorter and have maybe a song, maybe a reading, some kind of meditation or homily, and a much smaller crowd. Sometimes it's important to be there for the moment that a casket is lowered, and sometimes families aren't interested in doing something like that. So that's just part of the conversation that we would have is, do you want something like this? And of course, if cremation is the choice, then graveside could look different if it was an entombment, or interment, thank you. So it's just there as a, think about this, is this something that you want? And a couple of other things that are down there under miscellaneous, whether there is an obituary that you want to be put in the newspaper. Sometimes that is a version of the eulogy that would be shared. Sometimes it's just the facts. And then sometimes there is the option to give gifts in lieu of flowers, and so a family would designate where they would like gifts given in memory of their loved one. So now the backside of that and the sample service, we can kind of go back and forth a little bit. The memorial service part up at the top has all of the elements, almost just one thing at a time, whereas the other one has, here are places where you can do songs throughout. Here are places where you can do remembrances or psalms or other readings, but they're more or less the same thing. We have meditation / homily if desired, because these days that's not always something that families want. You won't hurt my feelings if you don't want a meditation or a homily at a memorial service. Sometimes I think people feel like they should say yes to the person who preaches the most, but I'm not offended if you don't want a meditation. What won't happen is an altar call. What won't happen is an altar call. This was one of the things that when we were standing over in the fellowship hall a few minutes ago, a few of us were talking about what's the worst part of a memorial service, and a couple of us said in unison, altar calls. That's not going to happen here. It happened one time when I wasn't officiating, and I about fell out of my chair. So that's not an option that you can check on a list if I'm doing the service. Find somebody else, some other church. So then it is a worship service, is how to think of a memorial service. The service itself is all of the elements that we have, with the addition of eulogy and of remembrances, if that's something that you want. But scripture readings, music, special music, congregational singing, all of the regular things that are part of every Sunday, in part, it gives a sense of comfort that this is something, we know how this goes. This feels familiar to me. This is comforting to me, that this is very similar to how we gather every Sunday. And there's some additional pieces to it. When Brian and I were planning our wedding, it was very similar. We wanted a church service with some vows in there. And it was very unusual, I think, for a lot of people, but a memorial service is similar. It's a church service, and there's a couple of additional elements in there too. So this is the part where it will take a little bit of thinking, conversation. What are that handful of songs? They don't have to come from the hymnal. They don't have to be religious songs. They can be songs that are meaningful to you or to your loved ones that can be part of the service. It can be a recording. We don't automatically look down our noses at recordings these days. So this is where it is open for you to make decisions that are important to you and meaningful to you. So music is one thing to think about, and scripture readings are other things. If you came to me and we sat down and we needed to plan a memorial service and you had no idea what songs you wanted, you had no idea what scripture readings you wanted, I have ideas. So don't worry if you don't have any ideas. Very often there are, Brian can take very often there are a handful of sample services that I have particularly liked that I can share, that we can look at together, and I can make recommendations for scripture readings that you can choose from. Same thing with music. So if you don't know or haven't decided, don't worry, I will help. Andy.
How do you deal with family conflicts or power struggles? Do you let the family figure it out, or do you intervene?
I won't.
If they're conflicting on different things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wife versus mother. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the situation. It depends on the nature of the conflict. Sometimes they will work it out between them. Sometimes they need a little bit of help sorting through what is important and why. If it's over this song or that song, I will usually let them sort that out and just give them a deadline and say, let me know. But if it's something deeper than that, then we'll find a way to have another conversation. So it's sort of like and even in that case, if it's a difference of I want this song or I want that song, there's usually more going on underneath that then it's not really about the song. It's about other stuff that's unresolved.
There was a question from Zoom about plaques for the Memorial Garden.
Yeah.
Can you just say maybe a word about
Thank
what
you.
those are in case anybody doesn't know, and what's involved in making sure that people get a plaque on the Memorial Garden wall?
Yes, in the Memorial Garden, on this wall, on the other side, there are plaques with the names and years, birth year and death year, of people who have been members here when they died or their children. And so there are a couple of instances where we have children who are not members, but were the children of members whose names are there. It used to be that the families automatically paid for those plaques, $200 odd. The Congregational Care Commission decided that the commission will now, it's the commission, right? That the commission will now pay for those automatically. If a family wants to make a donation to the church in some other way, that's fine. But we decided that that was something that was a burden to assume that the family would pay for, and so we decided that the commission would pay for those. I hope that answers the question. Do you have questions about the Memorial Garden plaques? So this is why on All Saints' Day we have our fellowship time out in the garden, and we have often had someone of the stature of Gary Noctegal to share some stories about people whose names are up there on the wall. And it has been a way that we remember and recognize people who have contributed to the life of this congregation. Nancy.
Are you using the word member and regular attender interchangeably?
At this moment, no. At this moment, by member, I mean somebody has gone through membership process, become a formal member on a membership Sunday, been received by the congregation. I know. You didn't see the face Nancy just made. But I feel like we are continually opening in lots of ways to not be bound by
to exercise some discretion. And yeah, this might be the sort of thing that congregational care might want to take up in terms of that question. It's a good one, Nancy.
Yes, the question of the plaques in Memorial Garden have been sticky in many ways. I see lots of nodding of heads that we have gone round and round about.
Yeah, I think you'd make a good point, right? There's some folks who might not be members, but they're every bit as part of the life of the church in terms of just being an attender. Yeah, I think it's a good question for congregational care to take up.
Yeah. Tiffany has a question.
Kind of on the flip side of that same coin, longtime members who don't currently attend, but their spouse is on the wall. I mean,
Same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think there would be lots of room for discretion.
okay.
Yep.
And then a thought that I had through all of this, for those of you who know my mom, you might not be surprised. She had a file at the top of her desk, like in one of those upright files, where from the time she was probably in her 40s, she kept sticking favorite hymns and quotes and scriptures in, and it was lovely when she wasn't even sick and pointed that out. And it was like at the time we were planning her memorial service, we knew exactly what she wanted.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that, Brian and I have done the trust thing, and I think this is a good place to put something like that, is in that folder, so that it is a place that your loved ones would find these things. Yeah, when people come and they have a handwritten note that says, this is what this meant to me, or, with Steve Regere's service, we had a note from his mother that she had written to him, and so it helped us to give some shape and some significance to planning that service, that we had that. Are there questions? On Zoom, we have a question.
The question was about whether they can get a digital copy of the session that we're doing, and yes, we'll have it recorded. And the handout, yes, we can put the handouts
Send me an email
in the Wednesday email, or
if
send
you
Audrey
need
an
a copy of the handouts. Send me an email, and I will make sure that you get these copies. Any other questions? Again, a lot of these things are interchangeable. I have a congregation, so now I'm looking at the sample memorial service order, prelude, welcome, prayer of invocation, a congregational song, the eulogy, a congregational song, remembrances, and usually if there are remembrances, we'll just do them all together. So let's say there are 3 grandchildren. We'll have all 3 go one right after another. Congregational song or special music, psalm or other reading, and this is where if there's a poem or something else that is meaningful, at whose service? At Edmund Jansen's service, they read an excerpt from his memoir as one of the readings. So we got to hear something in Edmund's voice. Gospel or other reading, meditation. We use meditation here, I think, because before we started using the word homily, which is a shorter sermon. I hope you've noticed we don't preach 30-minute sermons around here anymore. Before we started using the word homily, I think meditation was the designation to say, this is 10 minutes. This isn't a sermon. This is something really short. So meditation slash homily, if desired. Song of response, prayer of committal, benediction, and that's where we put instructions for the reception and the postlude. So something to look at, all those places, all of those elements, think about like Legos. They can be moved around, they can be edited, they can be personalized. Any other questions? Okay, well, anything else on Zoom? We're good? Nothing? Hearing nothing? Brian, any final words?
Yeah, maybe just a quick thank you to Audrey and all of the other presenters who have been part of this series. Our Congregational Care Commission was meeting earlier this week, and one of the things that we began exploring was that this has seemed to be a really worthwhile series covering topics like memorial services, trusts and wills, advanced healthcare directives. Would there be other things in that larger life planning series that you all would find helpful for a future series like this? If you have ideas for things like that, check in with either me or Linda or Audrey, and we can keep this idea going. But thanks to each of our presenters for their work on this.